First of all, he was Italian. You know, mob guys, we're Italian, we love other Italians, just the way it goes, especially seeing them succeed. So, but connected, what does that mean? Because there's a friendship involved?
Frank Sinatra is a name soaked in legend. The smooth voice, the smirk, the spotlight. But when he passed in 1998, another story was waiting in the wings, one buried in archives. We're talking hidden FBI files, private letters meant for no eyes but his own, and recordings so intimate they were never meant to be heard. But what if I told you that buried beneath the spotlight, hidden behind the glamorous image of old blue eyes, was an archive of secrets? A paper trail of letters, files, piles of unreleased recordings, and notes that reveal a man more complicated and more entangled in power than most of us ever imagined. These are the pieces of a puzzle that strip away the carefully crafted image and reveal the man underneath. What they found inside his secret archive isn't just surprising. Trust me, it will leave you speechless as to the kind of person Frank Sinatra was. Let's begin. The legend and the mystery. To understand why Sinatra became a man worth remembering by his fans and a man worth surveilling by the feds, not just as an artist, but as a potential threat, you have to start with the legend itself. Frank Sinatra was born in Hoboken, New Jersey in 1915, the son of Italian immigrants. His father, a firefighter and part-time prize fighter. His mother, Dolly, a midwife and political fixer, who knew how to twist arms at the ballot box. Influence ran in the family before Frank ever sang a note. By the early 1940s, Sinatra had become a national obsession. Teenagers, mostly young women, screamed and fainted at his concerts. Newspapers compared him to Beatlemania before the Beatles even existed. His voice wasn't just beautiful, it was intimate. It felt like he was singing to you, personally, in lively clubs and radio broadcasts. By the 1950s, Sinatra was no longer just a singer. He was an actor, an Oscar winner for From Here to Eternity, 1953. He became the unofficial leader of the Rat Pack. Dean Martin, Sammy Davis Jr., Peter Lawford, Joey Bishop. Together, they were Hollywood's bad boys, drinking, partying, gambling, and reinventing Las Vegas as a playground for the powerful. But where there's glamour, there's shadow. Even in his prime, Sinatra was followed by rumors. The whispers went something like this. Sinatra didn't just perform in Las Vegas. He moved in circles where mobsters called the shots. He wasn't just friendly with politicians, he had leverage. Some claimed he was the one who introduced John F. Kennedy to powerful unions and questionable allies. And then there were the stories of his temper, his paranoia, his need for absolute control. Officially, Sinatra denied mob ties. He mocked the press whenever the subject came up. He even sued some newspapers. In 1960, when asked about alleged mafia connections, he snapped, "Any report that I fraternize with mobsters is a dirty lie." One of such times was when Sinatra was seen present at the Mafia Havana Conference in 1946, a gathering of United States Mafia and Cosa Nostra leaders in the Cuban capital. The press reported that he was with Charles "Lucky" Luciano, who organized the meet. Charles "Lucky" Luciano was an Italian gangster who operated mainly in the United States. He started his criminal career in the 5 Points Gang and helped in developing the National Crime Syndicate. In the crime world, Luciano was considered the undisputed father of the Italian-American Mafia. Some reports also stated that Sinatra flew to Havana with Al Capone cousins, Charlie, Rocco, and Joseph Fischetti from Chicago, who acted as the singer's chaperone and bodyguard. Sinatra performed at the event, but years later, he said that he had no idea he was being taken to a major mob convention and he was just there to perform like the entertainer that he was. But the denials never erased the image of Sinatra, photographed with known mob figures like Sam Giancana, the Chicago boss linked to casino rackets and political influence campaigns. If Sinatra was clean, why was he always around men who weren't? Here's the thing about fame. It can protect you as much as it exposes you to scrutiny. Sinatra's celebrity status allowed him to travel in worlds most people couldn't. On one hand, he was shaking hands with presidents, and on the other, he was singing in mob-owned casinos, dining with men whose business was violence and intimidation through and through. To law enforcement, Sinatra was both a puzzle and a problem. Was he guilty of anything? Or was he just guilty of being too close to dangerous people? The FBI wasn't willing to take chances. They opened a file on Sinatra as early as the 1940s, and that file was never closed until after his death in 1998. That file would grow into a mountain of suspicion over 1,200 pages of memos, wiretap notes, and investigations. Sinatra wasn't just an entertainer. To J. Edgar Hoover's FBI, he was a potential national security concern. And here's the irony. The more Sinatra denied it, the more intriguing he became. Because logically, the louder someone insists, "I have nothing to hide," the more we start asking, what if he does? The FBI files. Imagine this. You're Frank Sinatra. You're selling out arenas. Presidents see you as a friend. Your face is everywhere. Your voice is America's biggest soundtrack. And yet every phone call, every meeting, every handshake could end up in an FBI file. Because J. Edgar Hoover's bureau didn't just listen to Sinatra's music. They listened to him. 40 years of watching The Voice. The FBI file on Sinatra began in the 1940s. It didn't close until after his death in 1998. That's more than 4 decades of surveillance, over 1,200 pages. The Bureau said it was about national security, but the truth was that Sinatra was everything FBI Director Hoover distrusted: powerful, Italian-American, politically influential, and too close to violent people the FBI couldn't control. And they took note of all of it: wiretaps, memos, anonymous tips, reports so detailed it cut across almost every aspect of his life, especially the mob connection they couldn't ignore. And the most consistent thread in the files pointed mostly to organized crime. Sinatra was repeatedly linked to mob figures, especially Sam Giancana, boss of the Chicago outfit. Giancana wasn't some small-time thug. He controlled gangs, unions, even allegedly had ties to CIA operations during the Cold War. And yet, there's Sinatra photographed with him at clubs, restaurants, even private gatherings. Was this just coincidence? Sinatra always insisted it was, but the FBI didn't buy it. One 1967 memo described Sinatra as a close associate of Giancana. Another noted his connections to Willie Moretti, a New Jersey mobster who reportedly helped launch Sinatra's early career by leaning on band leaders to hire him and, most notable, Lucky Luciano, the infamous mob founder and crime boss. At the time, Sinatra also hid the fact that his family came from the same tiny Sicilian town as Luciano. Here's where things get even messier. In 1960, Sinatra became one of John F. Kennedy's most vocal celebrity supporters. He campaigned for him. He performed at fundraisers. He even hosted Kennedy at his Palm Springs estate. The friendship seemed glamorous, but to the FBI, it was a nightmare. Why? Because Sinatra wasn't just cozy with Kennedy, he was cozy with mobsters. And the Bureau feared that meant the Oval Office itself was being compromised. In one memo, agents speculated that Sinatra was a liaison between Giancana and Kennedy's inner circle, particularly through Judith Campbell Exner, a woman romantically linked to both Kennedy and Giancana. Think about that. A U.S. president, a mafia boss, and Frank Sinatra, tied together by a single woman. This triangle sparked some serious controversies. Sinatra knew he was under surveillance, and it drove him mad. In public, he mocked the press whenever mob rumors came up. In private, he raged. According to biographer Kitty Kelly, Sinatra once exploded. "They've had me under surveillance for years. What have they got? Nothing. Not a damn thing." He wasn't entirely wrong. Despite thousands of pages, the FBI never charged Sinatra with a crime. The files are full of allegations, suspicions, and unproven claims. But here's the irony. By watching him so obsessively, the Bureau kept the myth alive. The more the FBI chased Sinatra, the more people wondered, what exactly was he hiding? The secret letters. So when Sinatra's private papers began surfacing after his death, they didn't just reveal a star's relics. They revealed the man himself. The letters, love notes, political correspondence, late-night frustrations scribbled in ink. Together, they show something the FBI file never could. The voice inside Sinatra's head. Firstly, the romantic side. Sinatra lived for romance. That much was obvious on stage. But his letters prove it behind closed doors. Handwritten notes to Ava Gardner, who he regarded as his great love, his torment, swinging from obsession to despair. One letter drips with raw emotion. "You are the only thing that makes life worth living. Please, don't destroy me." This wasn't the swaggering Rat Pack leader. This was a man begging not to be abandoned. In private ink, Sinatra wasn't the chairman of the board. He was fragile, teal, needy, almost desperate. Then, the political side surfaced. Sinatra didn't just write for love. He wrote to presidents. He wrote to John F. Kennedy and Ronald Reagan. Letters that show Sinatra moving in circles far beyond the stage. With Kennedy, the tone was brotherly, hopeful, like a man moved with passion. Sinatra campaigned hard for JFK, and the letters show his pride in being part of history. But after Hoover and Kennedy grew nervous about Sinatra's mob ties, the friendship froze. JFK distanced himself. The White House stopped indulging Sinatra. Sinatra's letters from that period turned bitter. He felt used, pulled into politics for the glamour, then discarded when the heat got too high. One confidant later recalled Sinatra fuming, "They wanted my voice for the campaign, then slammed the door in my face." With Reagan, the tone was different. Reagan admired Sinatra. The two men bonded over Hollywood roots, patriotism, and old-school values. Letters from the 1980s show Sinatra pledging loyalty, offering advice, and sometimes venting about the press. These letters reveal Sinatra not just as an entertainer, but as a man obsessed with influence, with being heard, with being taken seriously. Then the private frustrations. What stood out most in these documents wasn't the glamour. It was the frustration. Sinatra hated being cornered by rumors. He hated feeling watched. His letters are filled with complaints about the press, about betrayal, about people cashing in on his name. One note to a close associate reads almost like a confession. "They want to paint me as a gangster, a puppet. But all I ever wanted was respect." Respect. Is that so much to ask? This was Sinatra without his tuxedo. without his spotlight. Just a man raging against the image the world was painting of him, between loyalty and survival. The letters paint a man torn. On one hand, he was fiercely loyal to friends, to lovers, to politicians who made him feel valued. On the other hand, he felt paranoid, afraid that every loyalty could backfire, afraid that the wrong friend, the wrong favor, the wrong headline could undo everything. And in many ways, it did. The Kennedy fallout haunted him. The FBI file never let him breathe. And yet, Sinatra kept trying to explain himself. To presidents, to friends, to the women who defined him. The voice that once captivated millions was suddenly whispering on paper, vulnerable like every other person. The unreleased recordings and hidden treasures. You know the voice, smooth, confident, effortless. Every single time he performed, Frank Sinatra sounded like he was born singing perfection. But hidden in his archive, one the public was never meant to hear. A voice that cracked, stumbled, even cursed when things went wrong. Not every note Sinatra recorded was made to be heard. Tucked away on piled-up tapes, behind the files, the letters, the photographs, were unfinished songs, abandoned takes, and raw rehearsals. To some, they might sound ordinary, but together they reveal something extraordinary. Sinatra, not as the icon he was known to be, but as an ordinary man behind the microphone. His perfectionism was legendary. Engineers and musicians often said he could nail a song in 1 or 2 takes. When he did, that was it. The record was finished. But there was no margin for error. If a take didn't meet his standard, no matter how close, it was discarded. For Sinatra, a recording wasn't just about pitch or timing. It had to carry a certain weight, emotion, and polish. Anything less wasn't good enough. That's why the discarded takes are so telling. On them, you hear Sinatra stop mid-phrase, irritated with himself. You hear laughter when something goes off track. You hear the weariness in his voice after hours in the studio. These tapes don't undercut his reputation. They make it fuller. They show the struggle behind the smoothness. So why didn't he release these near-perfect tapes? Because image mattered. Sinatra worked hard to shape his public persona. He was stylish, confident, and controlled. Releasing rough, unfinished recordings would have chipped away at that image. He wanted the audience to hear only the finished product, the best of the best. Anything else stayed sealed away. The way sessions were run in his era explains part of it too. From the 1940s through the 1960s, Sinatra recorded live with full orchestras. Tape machines ran continuously, capturing every false start and every mistake. Mistakes weren't treated as collectible behind-the-scenes gems like they might be today. They were routine, and they stayed behind the scene, sealed. Yet, the archive has real value. It shows how Sinatra worked. He wasn't just a voice dropped into a studio. He was deeply involved in shaping the sound. Musicians remember how he pushed for adjustments, tiny shifts in tempo, phrasing, or arrangement, until the song fit his vocal style exactly. On the tapes, you hear him test and retest lines, refining them until they felt right. That effort often disappears in the final recordings. To listeners, the result felt effortless. But the tapes prove otherwise. They reveal the long hours, the repetitions, the tiny details that added up to 3 minutes of seamless music. And beyond the process, they capture the person. The sigh of frustration, the quick joke with the band, the sound of a tired voice at the end of a long session. It's a reminder that even someone with Sinatra's talent faced the same human challenges as every working artist. These recordings also highlight the pressure he lived under. By the height of his career, every new release carried enormous weight. The world expected perfection. Keeping Rough Takes Private was a way of protecting himself, of protecting the image he had built. If the public only heard the flawless version, then Frank Sinatra remained flawless. But looking back now, the archive tells a richer story. It shows the discipline behind the polish, the persistence behind the ease. It shows a man unwilling to compromise, even when no one else would have noticed the difference. Not every note was meant to be heard, but in what Sinatra left behind, we find something just as revealing as his greatest performances. An honest portrait of an artist chasing perfection, one take at a time. What it revealed about Sinatra's life. Frank Sinatra's archive does more than preserve history. It pulls back the curtain on one of the most carefully crafted public images in American culture. Because the truth is, Sinatra wasn't just a star singer, an actor, or a celebrity. He was a man who lived in constant negotiation between his carefully crafted image and reality, between loyalty and fear, between the spotlight and the shadows. And what these files, letters, and recordings reveal is clear. Sinatra's greatest obsession wasn't fame. It was control. From the very start, Sinatra controlled how he was seen. He chose his clothes with care, walked into a room with presence, and made sure photographers got the right angle. But it went far deeper than fashion. Sinatra's reputation was his empire. Every friendship, every headline, every whisper of scandal mattered. And in an era without social media, rumors still spread like wildfire. From the mob connections to the political deals and secret romances, he knew they followed him everywhere. And if he couldn't erase them, he would at least try to outpace them. That's why the FBI files were so dangerous. Not because they confirmed his involvement in any crime, but because they documented the possibility of them. In a world where perception was power, Sinatra couldn't afford suspicion. One of the most striking patterns in the archive is Sinatra's constant tug-of-war between loyalty and survival. He surrounded himself with powerful friends, from mobsters to politicians to Hollywood icons. Loyalty meant everything to him. If you were with Sinatra, you were protected. If you crossed him, you were cut out for good, just like that. But power came with risk. His letters to Presidents Kennedy and Reagan show a man trying to balance friendship with self-preservation. Sinatra wanted to be close to power, but not close enough to burn. For example, his friendship with John F. Kennedy was both an honor and a curse. Sinatra opened doors, hosted parties, made introductions. But when rumors of mob connections grew louder, the Kennedys distanced themselves. And Sinatra never forgot that feel of betrayal. The archives show a man who felt used by politics, betrayed by people he helped, yet still desperate to stay relevant in the corridors of power. What then does the unreleased recordings, the handwritten notes, and the hidden letters have in common? They all point to Sinatra's deep fear of exposure and his obsession with control. He wanted to be remembered as flawless, the perfect performer, the untouchable star. Anything that showed cracks or vulnerability, whether it was a studio mistake, a messy relationship, or a whispered rumor, had to be hidden away. This wasn't vanity, it was survival. Sinatra came from a working-class family in Hoboken, New Jersey. He knew what it meant to work your way up, and once he reached the top, he refused to let anything pull him down. So he curated, he edited, he erased, and in doing so, he built a fortress of control around himself. But inside that fortress, he was still vulnerable, still paranoid, still deeply human. The most surprising revelation from the archives isn't the scandals. It was how human he was, as opposed to the perfect styled image of himself that he so proudly portrayed. The love letters show a man capable of deep passion, sometimes insecure, sometimes jealous. The political correspondence shows someone who wanted respect beyond the stage, who wanted to matter not just as an entertainer, but as a force in American life. And the studio recordings? They show a man who worked harder than anyone, who could laugh at himself in one moment and break down in frustration the next. Brilliant? Absolutely. Flawed? Without question. It's easy to remember Sinatra as the swaggering icon, the man with a drink in one hand and a mic in the other. But the archives remind us that beneath that was someone who worried, who struggled, who feared being forgotten or misunderstood. So what does all this mean? What do these files and recordings actually reveal about Sinatra's life? They reveal that the unfiltered image of Frank Sinatra, the perfect gentleman, the untouchable star, all of which was exactly just an image. The real Sinatra was far more complex. He was a man obsessed with control and reputation, a man torn between loyalty and fear, a man who could be both generous and ruthless, both magnetic and paranoid. And maybe that's the greatest legacy of all. What they found in Frank Sinatra's secret archive will leave you speechless, not because it destroyed his legend, but because it revealed how much more there was to him than we ever knew. The files, the letters, the tapes, together, they stripped away the tuxedo and the spotlight to reveal a man who was brilliant, yet fragile, powerful, yet haunted. His life was shaped by loyalty, suspicion, love, and an unrelenting pursuit of control. The archive shows us Sinatra not as a flawless icon, but as a man who fought battles in private while dazzling the world in public. And it's that duality, the legend and the man, that ensures his voice still carries weight, long after the curtain has fallen. This wasn't just an archive of documents, it was an archive of a life. And in opening it, we don't just hear Sinatra's story, we feel it. So if you enjoyed this one, tap like, hit subscribe, and stay with us for what's coming next.